When you're starting to sew figure skating dresses, the first question is what pattern to use. And the short answer is there isn't a perfect pattern. Every pattern has its own adjustments, and just like sewing, unless you're making a custom sloper for any kind of garment sewing, you always need to sew up a mock-up and figure out what part of that pattern does or doesn't work with the body that you're working with, make the changes, and then sew your finished product. So the same is true when you are sewing a skating dress. You'll need to do a mock-up, find the fit issues, correct them, and then start again. So the pattern that I started with is called Klixo, and it is a really easy pattern to work with. It's pattern number 3508, and it's just a basic little dress. You can make it with or without the skirt, and it has a mock neck or an open scoop neck. It comes in child sizes, and then there's also another pattern envelope set that includes adult sizes. Did not work for me with this pattern is that when you make the scoop neck version, the scoop is a little too wide, so you're probably going to want to make that a little smaller, bring it a little closer into the neck and not scoop it quite as deeply. The other thing that I didn't care for, it's a really pretty skirt. It's very full, and I really like the way it, the curves that are drafted into the pattern make for really nice and even kind of gather folds on the skirt hem. And so it's a very pretty skirt. I still use a skirt all the time if I want a full skirt. But it's a little short. So when you trace it out, you're going to want to add to the front center curve and the back center curve just in the length. The biggest flaw, I think, to the pattern is that the sleeves are really wide. And you can see on the pattern envelope, if I zoom in here, you can see how baggy they are even on this sample dress. So if after you make up your mock-up, if you find that the sleeves are really wide, you're going to want to take some width out of the center of the sleeve, flatten out the curve, the sleeve head curve a little bit, and then also bring up, underneath of the armpit on the front and back bodice pieces, you're going to want to bring that up to make that armhole a little smaller because it should be really fitted on a skating dress. And so if you make those changes, you will probably get a pretty good fit. Okay, so another pattern company that's very popular is called Jolly. If you go online and you look at their website, they have just an incredible number of options, a lot of different designs. So you're probably going to be able to find an already drafted pattern that's pretty close to what you're looking for. Each envelope comes with 22 sizes, so it's pretty easy to grade. If you take your measurements and you have somebody who has a long girth but very narrow bust, waist, and hips, you can trace out the longer girth, but then grade in for the width measurements to whatever they fall under. The thing that I struggled with about Jolly is that I believe their patterns are probably drafted by different designers. So each one has a different fit. And so I felt like there were inconsistent issues, and it was harder for me to use this pattern set to sew for a great number of bodies. I found that, like when I sewed this pattern, for example, it was too narrow and too long. So I took the measurements, I followed according to the measurement chart to trace out and grade the sizes, and then when I put it on the skater, even though I had done all of that, it was too long and too narrow, and it didn't have good coverage in the rear end. But then when I decided to try this pattern, the coverage was nice. This line came up, was great. The scoop was in a decent spot. It was a little low on the back. I shortened that up a little bit, but the whole pattern was too wide. So, same skater, took the measurements, looked on the back of the pattern, pattern envelope, graded between the sizes, and while this pattern fit that skater, and it was too narrow, when I made this one, it was too wide. So that's the inconsistency that I don't care for about Jolly. Okay, so the pattern company that I ended up settling on is called Specialty Sportswear, and I think, like all of the pattern companies, they have some great aspects to these patterns, and then there are some things that I needed to correct. And so they are drafted specifically for figure skaters, so the coverage in the bottom is great, and I think that for the most part, the fit is pretty good. I do need to make the sleeves a little narrower, And generally the patterns are a little wide, so I take some room out of the center of each thing, and sometimes the shoulder seam comes down too long and I need to shorten that up a little bit. I do lower the skirt line as well. I think the skirt sits a little too high on the hip. And I don't love the flat fitted skirt. I have redrafted my own flat fitted skirt because I feel like this one isn't very flattering and it sort of tugs and wrinkles. It just doesn't, it's not quite generous enough in the side seam. So those are the things that I don't love about specialty sportswear, but what I really do love is that they are very consistently drafted. Every design was drafted on the same base pattern. So it's very easy to mix and match the pattern pieces. A complaint that I hear from some people about specialty sportswear is that each pattern envelope only contains one size. I don't mind that because I feel like if you are going to be sewing skating dresses for a great number of skaters and you need to invest in a good solid set of base patterns that you can work off of consistently, the amount of time that I save in being able to have consistent results, knowing what to expect from my pattern every time is well worth it to me. So this is ultimately what I decided on. Let me know in the comments if you decide to sew with one of these sets of patterns, and let me know what you did and you didn't like about them. We all have our own opinions on what we think works best, and you really just have to experiment and find out what works best for you.